Well, I think it's the lack of communication between, well, the governments have had that for the past so many years, but also the lack of communication between people, and the people-to-people contact, which is very important, and which is missing. So that needs to be addressed. And if the governments aren't able to do that, I think the people themselves should be taking the initiative to build up that consensus where, they eventually force the powers at play to make sure that, there's communication going on, because that's the thing that's really missing.
Probably accountability, or the lack thereof, and impunity. I think both governments have gotten away with not addressing the main issues of governance that face their respective countries and their people, and whether it is, providing adequate health, education, basic services, and keeping both populations very distracted with often extraneously created cross-border issues, and getting away with it, which has been most disappointing.
Basically, the biggest challenge is the visa regime, because as long as people keep meeting each other, there's people-to-people contact, we can overcome our challenges. We can break stereotypes and overcome the challenges. But the problem is that the military establishment on both sides of the border are actually quite hawkish. It's not just Pakistan's establishment, but also India's establishment that has recently become more hawkish. And so unless and until they facilitate the peace process, it's very difficult to move forward, because the political parties on both sides of the border actually do want peace and trade and people-to-people contact. And so it's actually, we need to get rid of the visa barriers, and there should be more free movement across the border.
I think that the question really is, how do you make peace with the present? And it's very difficult, because it means letting the past go, whether it be what happened 66 years ago or what happened in recent years. It's a very difficult thing to ask of any person or any country, but I think that that's the biggest challenge.
The fact that both countries have a narrative which tends to see the other as the exact opposite.
The biggest challenge is, political, in the sense that because of whatever happened over a period of time, there is a sense of insecurities, issues created on both sides, and there needs to be some kind of political capital built up to sort of, get those issues resolved. And right now what is happening is that often the political class is riding on those insecurities and using it for their own gains. So until the people understand and appreciate that these issues need to be resolved, that sort of won't go away. So, and that is a very difficult thing to do. It might actually take decades and probably, a generation or two before it gets sorted out.
We don't understand each other. There's a very limited section of the population which gets a chance to interact. That is the biggest challenge at the moment. Of course, there are political challenges, there are issues which need to be solved by the politicians, but any tension, any conflagration, it can always get amplified, because the electronic media misuses that lack of understanding, lack of interaction, and a lot of misconceptions on both sides.
A serious trust deficit that exists between both nations, which needs to be overcome through sort of a greater contact between the people, face-to-face contact, and for which obviously there has to be greater political less political rivalry. And I think this is the time now is ripe for having some sort of conversation and dialogue at both the political level as well as between having more exchanges of people going both across borders. There's a number of things that need to be done in terms of bettering the relationship between India and Pakistan. But before we can get to that, I think we need to, as Pakistanis, as a nation, as a people, really understand our own history and where we're coming from. And I think that process, there's a lot of history is buried. A lot of history has been erased, and the challenges of education, the challenges of relearning, and digging up the facts and
and recognizing and facing that trauma and facing that, and then thinking about how to form future relations.
We see this in any kind of conflict situation when two parties who are very close to each other and who live very close to each other can't seem to crawl out of the box they've dug themselves into. It sometimes helps to have an outside broker come in and just open up the dialogue again. Now, whether that outside broker is the US or it's England or the UK or any other country that is trusted equally by both India and Pakistan, they can play a role in it. But I think that before we start relying too heavily on outside brokers, we really need to get as far as we can on our own. At the end of the day, we live next to each other.
Non-interference might be a refreshing strategy that the West could sometimes try. There are international mechanisms and international organizations that do have a role to play, and I think the UN certainly could push for better dialogue between India and Pakistan, but this is certainly a local issue that the South Asian countries need to resolve primarily on their own, and little can be done if there is not a commitment from India and Pakistan to address these issues.
This process of letting go and rebuilding something new has to come from Indians and Pakistanis. To the extent that the US has supported work in other countries and other regions, it seems to me that the best place to invest, be it resources or funds, would be in a truth and reconciliation process. My personal belief is that that process should come from India and Pakistan, of course. But to the extent that the US wants to play a supporting role, it seems to me that would be the best place.
Absolutely. I think US has a very important role to play. And, to bring warring parties, if Pakistan and India refuse to talk to each other, US has a role to play. And plus with what's happening in Afghanistan, US has a very deep strategic interest in seeing Pakistan and India get along as two allies of the US.
There could be the role of an intermediary who helps bring the parties onto a table. But beyond that, I don't think there should be any further sort of interference in sort of either dictating a solution or saying something.
I think at the end of the day, we have to sit across the table and solve our own issues, because while the US may have other interests, but geography dictates that we sit across, we solve things, and we build trust rather than anybody else.
A very clear and simple message in it is that US needs to stay out, right? And one of the things is to stop funding the military in Pakistan. I think that's my message.
अमेरिका, ब्रिटेन को क्या लगता है दिमाग उन्हीं के पास है, हमारे पास नहीं है. जब दोस्ती पाकिस्तान और इंडिया को करना है तो किसी बिचौलिए की क्या जरूरत है? जिनसे शिकायत है उनसे बैठ के आप करिए ना बात. आप उनसे जाके करेंगे तो वो तो अपने मतलब के लिए खेलते हैं. उन्हें जो समझ में आएगा वो आपको कन्विंस करेंगे, और कहीं ना कहीं आप भी दबे हुए हैं उनके उसमें, कहीं ना कहीं से आपने भी लोन लिया हुआ है तो आप भी उनकी सुनोगे. तो मुझे नहीं लगता है कि इस तरीके से कोई भी आपका एक अनबायस्ड सोल्यूशन हमें मिल पाएगा.